The sentence was barely louder than the rain tapping against the kitchen windows, but it struck me with enough force to split my life into a before and an after. My husband stood in the doorway beneath the soft gray light of a Sunday morning, his face drained of color, his fingers still curled around the phone that had just rung. Then he looked at me as though I were already someone from his past and whispered, "Vivian's back. Let us divorce." For several seconds, I could hear nothing except the slow hum of the refrigerator and the faint whistle of the kettle behind me. I stared at the man I had loved for 11 years, waiting for him to smile, to shake his head, to tell me it was some terrible joke. But Adrian Vale did not smile. He lowered his eyes instead, and in that small movement, everything I believed about my marriage began to fall apart. Before we continue, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel Ancient Truth if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet courage it takes to rebuild a broken heart. My name is Maren Whitlock, and until that morning, I had thought I understood the shape of my life. Adrian and I lived in a pale blue house at the edge of a small town where the morning smelled of wet grass and fresh bread from the bakery down the road. We had no children, though not for lack of trying, and that absence had become a silent room inside our marriage that neither of us entered anymore. Still, I believed we were happy in the ordinary way that long-married people sometimes are. We shared coffee before work. We folded laundry together on Saturdays. He warmed my side of the bed on cold nights, and I left handwritten notes in his lunch bag when I knew he had a difficult day ahead. We had survived my mother's death, his father's stroke, 2 miscarriages, a failed business, and years when money had been so tight that we counted coins at the grocery store. I thought hardship had made us unbreakable. I did not know that some marriages do not collapse from one great tragedy. Sometimes they weaken quietly around a name that has never truly left the room. Vivian Hart was not a stranger to me. She was the woman Adrian had loved before me, though he had always described their relationship as something unfinished rather than something lost. They had grown up together, attended the same school, and planned a future that ended abruptly when Vivian disappeared from town at 24. Adrian told me she had left without explanation, taking only a suitcase and leaving behind a short note that said she needed a different life. He had spoken of her only twice during our marriage, both times with a distant sadness that I mistook for grief rather than longing. I never felt threatened by a woman who had vanished so completely. The past, I believed, was harmless when it stayed in the past. But that Sunday morning, the past had called his phone. I turned off the kettle because the shrill whistle had begun, though I could barely feel my hands. Adrian moved toward the kitchen table and sat down slowly. Daylight spilled across the wooden surface between us, illuminating the scratches from years of meals and arguments and reconciliations. I asked him how long he had known she was coming back. He said he had received an email 3 weeks earlier. 3 weeks. For 21 days, he had kissed my forehead, eaten my cooking, asked about my work, and slept beside me while carrying the knowledge that the woman he had once planned to marry was returning. He told me he had tried to ignore it. He said Vivian had been ill and had come back because her mother's house was being sold. Then he said the words that cut deeper than the request for divorce. He admitted that when he saw her name on his phone, something inside him came alive that he thought had died years ago. I did not cry immediately. Pain that large often arrives without tears. I walked to the living room and stood beside the window, watching children in bright raincoats jump over puddles on the sidewalk. Their laughter drifted through the glass, painfully normal against the destruction inside my home. Adrian followed me and said he did not want to lie to me. He claimed I deserved honesty. I turned around and asked whether honesty had only become important after Vivian returned. His expression tightened, and for the first time, I saw guilt beneath his sadness. He admitted he had met her the previous afternoon at a cafe near the train station. He said they talked for 2 hours. He said nothing physical happened. But I understood then that betrayal did not always begin with a kiss. Sometimes it began with a secret meeting and a husband returning home to ask his wife what she wanted for dinner. By noon, the rain had stopped, and sunlight began breaking through the clouds as though the world had decided to become beautiful out of cruelty. Adrian packed a small suitcase and said he would stay at his brother's house. He promised not to make any legal decisions until I had time to process what was happening. I almost laughed at that. He had already made the only decision that mattered. When the front door closed behind him, I remained standing in the hallway, surrounded by framed photographs of vacations, birthdays, and ordinary afternoons. In one picture, Adrian held me beneath a yellow umbrella on our 5th anniversary. In another, we stood outside the hospital after his father recovered, our faces exhausted and hopeful. I studied each image as though searching for proof that the people in them had been real. The first week passed in a blur of daylight and silence. I went to work at the town library because staying home felt unbearable. I shelved books, answered questions, and smiled at visitors while carrying a private collapse beneath my ribs. My closest friend, Orla Penn, noticed immediately. Orla was the kind of woman who never asked gentle questions when the truth required sharp ones. She brought sandwiches to my desk and demanded to know why I had not mentioned that Adrian had moved out. When I finally told her, anger flashed across her face, but she did not insult him. Instead, she took my hand and said that before I blamed myself, I needed to remember that another person's confusion was not evidence of my failure. That sentence followed me home. For years, I had quietly blamed myself for everything missing in our marriage. I blamed my body for the children we never had. I blamed my sadness after the miscarriages for the distance that followed. I blamed my long work hours when Adrian's business struggled. I had become so accustomed to carrying guilt that I instinctively reached for it even when he chose someone else. That evening, under the clear afternoon light still lingering through the curtains, I opened an old drawer containing medical records, sympathy cards, and the tiny knitted socks my mother had bought after my first pregnancy. I sat on the floor and cried for the first time since Adrian asked for the divorce. I cried not only because he might leave, but because I realized how much of myself I had abandoned while trying to make our marriage survive. 3 days later, Vivian came to the library. I recognized her before she introduced herself. She had silver beginning at her temples, a slender face, and eyes that seemed permanently tired. She wore a cream coat despite the warm spring afternoon and held a folder against her chest. She did not look like a seductive memory returning to reclaim an old love. She looked fragile, almost frightened. My first instinct was to walk away, but she asked for 5 minutes. We sat at a table near the tall windows where sunlight fell across rows of books. Vivian told me she had not returned to take Adrian from me. She said she had contacted him because she believed she owed him the truth about why she left. Her explanation changed everything, though not in the way I expected. Vivian had not abandoned Adrian because she wanted another life. At 24, she had discovered that she was pregnant. Before she could tell him, she learned from Adrian's mother that his family was facing bankruptcy and that Adrian had been offered a job overseas. His mother, terrified that a baby would prevent him from leaving, begged Vivian to disappear. She told Vivian that Adrian had privately admitted he felt trapped by their relationship. Vivian believed her. She left town and later lost the baby alone in another city. For years, she carried the grief and shame in silence. Only recently, while caring for her dying mother, had she discovered letters Adrian had written after her disappearance, letters his mother had intercepted and hidden. Vivian returned not because she wanted to restart their romance, but because she could no longer live with the lie. I listened with my hands clenched beneath the table. Adrian had built his life around the belief that Vivian had chosen to leave him. Vivian had built hers around the belief that he had not wanted her. Both of them had been manipulated by fear, and now their reunion was not simply romantic longing. It was the reopening of a wound that had never been allowed to heal. For one dangerous moment, I felt sorry for them. Then I remembered that Adrian had still chosen secrecy. Old pain explained his confusion, but it did not excuse what he had done to me. Vivian looked directly at me and said Adrian had misunderstood their meeting. She had told him the truth, and he had begun speaking about destiny, lost years, and second chances. She said she stopped him. She explained that she had a life elsewhere, a teenage daughter from a later marriage, and no desire to destroy another woman's home. She had called him that Sunday morning to make sure he understood. I realized the phone call that triggered his request for divorce had not been an invitation. It had been a boundary. Adrian had heard Vivian's voice and made a decision before listening to what she was actually saying. When I returned home that afternoon, Adrian was sitting on the front steps. The sun was bright, and the garden needed trimming. For several seconds, we looked like any married couple meeting after an ordinary day. Then I noticed the suitcase beside him. He said his brother had told him to come home and face what he had done. He had spoken to Vivian again. He knew she did not want him back. His eyes filled with tears as he admitted that the request for divorce had not been about choosing Vivian over me. It had been about chasing the version of himself he believed had been stolen years ago. He thought that if he returned to the moment before she left, he could undo every disappointment that followed, including the losses in our marriage. He had confused nostalgia with love and regret with destiny. I let him inside, but I did not comfort him. We sat in the same kitchen where he had ended our life together a week earlier. Adrian apologized until the words lost shape. He said he loved me. He said he had panicked. He said he no longer wanted a divorce. But something inside me had changed. I understood that forgiveness and reconciliation were not the same thing. I could forgive the wounded young man inside him without trusting the husband who had allowed that wound to make decisions for us both. I told him I needed a separation. Not as punishment, but because I had spent years measuring my worth through our marriage, and I no longer knew who I was outside it. Adrian nodded, though his face crumpled. He moved into a small apartment near his office. We began counseling separately. During the following months, our conversations shifted from desperate apologies to painful honesty. He admitted that after our miscarriages, he had buried his grief because he thought strength meant silence. I admitted that I had hidden my resentment because I feared any conflict might push him away. We had been living politely beside wounds that shaped every decision we made. Summer arrived slowly. I repainted the bedroom, joined a weekend hiking group, and began teaching children's reading classes at the library. The house felt unbearably empty at first, but gradually the silence became mine rather than something left behind by Adrian. Vivian returned to her home after selling her mother's property. Before leaving, she sent me a letter. She thanked me for listening when anger would have been easier and wrote that love built on unfinished pain often looks more powerful than it really is. I kept the letter, not because I wanted to remember her, but because it reminded me that the person we fear is sometimes carrying a story as broken as our own. Adrian and I remained separated for nearly a year. He never pressured me to return. He attended counseling, repaired his relationship with his brother, and confronted his mother, who finally admitted what she had done before her death several years earlier. He began volunteering at a grief support center, not as a performance for me, but because he finally understood the damage caused by silence. I watched these changes from a distance, cautious and uncertain. Then, on a bright Saturday morning the following spring, I found him outside the library planting flowers with a community group. He looked older than he had a year before, but steadier. We walked through the town square afterward and talked for nearly 3 hours beneath clear blue skies. He did not ask me to come home. He did not promise never to hurt me again, because people cannot honestly make that promise. Instead, he said he wanted to build something new if I ever believed he had become safe enough to try. I did not answer that day. Weeks later, I invited him to the house for lunch. We sat in the garden under the afternoon sun, eating soup and fresh bread. The moment was not dramatic. There was no music, no sudden embrace, no perfect declaration. I simply reached across the table and placed my hand beside his. I told him I was willing to begin again, but not from where we left off. The old marriage had ended in the kitchen that rainy morning. Anything between us now would require new promises, new boundaries, and two people who refuse to disappear inside love. Adrian agreed. We did not remarry because we had never completed the divorce. Instead, we marked our new beginning with a small ceremony in the garden. Orla stood beside me. Adrian's brother brought flowers. There were no speeches about forever. We promised honesty, even when honesty was uncomfortable, and courage, especially when fear tempted us to run toward old illusions. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Your support helps stories of healing, truth, and second chances reach someone who may be quietly trying to rebuild their own life. And before the ending, please comment, healing begins with truth, if you believe a broken heart can become wiser without becoming bitter. I once believed my life fell apart the morning my husband whispered that Vivian was back. In some ways, it did. The marriage I thought I had was revealed to be filled with unspoken grief, hidden fear, and assumptions neither of us had challenged. But what fell apart was not only love. Illusion fell apart. Self-blame fell apart. Silence fell apart. And beneath the wreckage, I discovered something stronger than the life I had been trying to protect. I found the woman I had forgotten while being someone else's wife. I found the courage to leave the door closed until trust returned. And eventually, I found a man who understood that second chances are not given because the past is romantic. They are earned when two people finally become honest enough to stop living inside it.